The ship arrived sheathed in blood. Not painted, not marked in ceremonial crimson, but soaked, as though the void itself had bled upon its hull. Patrol drones first assumed it to be wreckage drifting in the star lanes. Then the beacon lit, an archaic human distress call, pulsing steady as a heartbeat. Every officer who heard it felt a tremor of dread. Ships could be destroyed, fleets dismantled, empires conquered, but that old code meant something stubborn had survived. "Identify yourself," ordered Praetorian Commander Salrith, though his voice cracked. His kind were bred for composure, yet even his crystalline mandibles trembled. Static, then a voice like gravel dragged across iron. "Tell your emperor, the Baba Yaga has come home." That name struck the Empire like a thrown knife. It spread from officers' mess halls to street vendors, whispered in the polished wings of the slave courts, muttered by merchants in smoky taverns. Baba Yaga, the human revenant, a specter from old border wars, half myth, half monster. Some claimed he had been executed by his own species for crimes too dark to speak. Others swore he had been consumed by the void itself. All agreed on one thing. Wherever he walked, destruction followed. The ship was towed into the capital's dockyards, and a crowd gathered in silence. When the hatch hissed open, a figure stumbled out, tall, gaunt, every movement a refusal to collapse. His armor was shattered, his coat shredded, his face pale with exhaustion, and binding his fractured plates together, strips of gray human adhesive. Duct tape. The dock officials recorded this detail, played it back in council chambers, and studied its molecular composition. No logic explained why such crude material still held under void exposure. "This," whispered one scholar, "is a profanity against physics." The man lifted his head. His eyes were washed-out blue, uncanny in their emptiness, yet behind them glimmered an ember that refused to die. "I'm Elias Veyer," he rasped, "but you knew me by another name." The response of the assembled courtiers was silence, sharp as broken glass. He was seized, shackled, and led into the capital's high council chamber, a cathedral of glass and silver whose vaults shimmered with constellations. The Emperor of the Galactic Empire presided, a being of radiant wings and liquid voice, whose very presence pressed against the lungs of mortals. "Why have you returned, human?" the Emperor asked, each syllable like a chime of crystal. Elias smiled with cracked lips, spitting blood onto the marble floor. "Because I ran out of enemies at the edge of the map." Shock rippled through the chamber. Some officials hissed. Others laughed nervously. The Emperor did not move. "You presume much, fleshborn. You enter our halls blood-soaked, speaking riddles. What do you seek?" "Survival," Elias replied simply. He was placed under the custody of Inquisitor Caliph, a scholar feared for her precision and merciless judgment. She observed him with eyes of polished obsidian, her every motion deliberate, her voice clipped. She recorded his scars, the strange burns across his body, and his irreverent humor. When she asked how his ship still flew, Elias shrugged. "Duct tape, God's gift to idiots like me." Caliph frowned. "You mock us." "No," Elias said, eyes distant. "I mock myself. You just happened to overhear." Days passed, and Caliph interrogated relentlessly. She pressed him about his journey, his battles, his purpose. Beneath sarcasm and grim jokes, references to things she did not understand. Florida Man, Chuck Norris, reality TV. She found an undercurrent of loneliness so profound it silenced her. At last, he revealed what he carried. Not wealth, not relics, but knowledge of a new threat. The Morvani swarm, a predator species rising from the void. "You think me myth?" Elias said, his voice low. "They are worse. They do not conquer. They consume. They strip my ship to bone, but I made them bleed first. The blood on my hull is theirs." The council dismissed him. The swarm was considered a ghost story, an old terror to keep border children obedient. But then outposts began to fall silent. Patrol fleets vanished. And finally, a survivor ship limped into harbor, its comm channels filled with screams. The recordings showed spines like blades, jaws like suns opening to devour. The Empire reeled. Markets closed. Ministers fled the capital. Citizens whispered in terror. And in the midst of this dread, Elias sat in chains, chuckling bitterly. "You stacked your fleets like dominoes," he muttered when Caliph asked why he laughed. "Line them pretty in rows, then wonder why they topple together. Haven't you ever watched Earth's reality TV? Same principle. Put idiots in a house, and they destroy themselves for ratings." She did not understand. Yet she watched his smile fade, replaced by something heavy as mourning. The swarm advanced, closer each day. The emperor summoned generals, debated weapons, issued decrees. Nothing slowed the tide. And then Elias requested a single thing. "Give me a ship. Any ship. Broken, forgotten, discarded. I'll make it sing." The council laughed. A single human in a ruin of a vessel against the swarm? Madness. But Caliph, against her own reason, whispered to the emperor that perhaps this was the very madness they required. He was granted a derelict destroyer, hull scarred, engines failing. To others it was a corpse. To Elias it was a weapon. He bound its vents with duct tape, rewired its heart with scavenged parts, painted crude sigils across its sides. And when asked why, he simply said, "A ship fights better when it believes it still matters." The battle came at last. The swarm poured into the system like a tidal wave of steel and bone, tearing apart the Empire's silver fleets. Panic crackled through the comm channels, and from the darkness, the battered destroyer roared to life. Its engines howled, its hull bled sparks, and ancient human music thundered through the void. Elias flew like a madman, weaving through the enemy, dragging clusters of the swarm into crossfire, detonating charges where none should exist. He laughed even as fire consumed him, as if survival were secondary to defiance. The climax burned bright, his ship plunging into the swarm's core, his voice across comms. Half laughter, half scream. "Tell Chuck Norris I said hi." Before the explosion bloomed like a new sun. When the light faded, the swarm fractured, retreating in confusion. Against all expectation, Elias crawled back from the wreckage, burned, broken, alive. The Empire was saved, temporarily, but what echoed through every soldier, every citizen, every minister was not the Emperor's command, nor the fleet's sacrifice. It was the memory of one human, bound in duct tape, who refused to fall. And here, dear reader, lies the strange truth of our kind. We are mocked, dismissed, and endlessly misunderstood. Yet it is often the broken who hold the line, and the foolish who find the courage to spit in the dark sigh. So when the void closes in around you, remember the Baba Yaga. And remember this: sometimes survival is nothing more than refusing to die until the stars notice your defiance. The first corpse fell from the sky in the capital's marketplace, burnt, twisted, and still screaming. It hit the marble with a sound like breaking glass, and for a moment the people thought it some terrible performance. Then the smell reached them: scorched flesh, acid, void. The Morvani swarm had left a gift. Their war had not ended with the Baba Yaga's reckless charge. It had only just begun. Inquisitor Caliph was in the square when it happened. She stood frozen as the crowd shrieked, dispersing in every direction like shards of shattered crystal. Elias Veyer was beside her, leaning on a cane fashioned from scrap steel, still limping from wounds half healed. He did not flinch at the horror. He only muttered, "They're testing you." That one died slow. "They want you afraid." Caliph turned to him, her obsidian eyes flashing. "And are you not afraid?" Elias smirked through his pale exhaustion. "Of course I am, but I got a higher pain threshold for stupid. Comes with being human." He tapped the cane on the cobblestones and added, "Besides, duct tape only works if you believe it will." That answer, maddening as it was, stuck with her as the Empire convulsed. Panic overtook order. Fleets regrouped, but commanders bickered. Markets closed. Priests whispered that the swarm was divine judgment. Children played at being Baba Yaga, wrapping themselves in ribbons of gray cloth, daring each other to spit in the dark. The Emperor summoned Elias again, this time not to mock but to demand. What do they seek? Territory? Tribute? Flesh? All of it, Elias said. His voice carried no drama, no embellishment, only exhaustion carved into syllables. You don't bargain with hunger. You only outlast it. And how would you outlast? The Emperor pressed. Not by standing still, Elias answered. You need raids, traps, chaos. You need someone willing to play dirty. And your fleets. He swept his hand at the assembled admirals in their silver cloaks. Your fleets are too clean. They fight like dancers on parade. The generals bristled. Caliph saw his words strike them like knives. Yet the Emperor remained silent, wings flickering faintly. And you would lead such chaos? Already did, Elias said. Once. Barely survived it. But if no one else volunteers, he raised a trembling hand. Here I am. And so it began. He was granted a squadron of broken ships, vessels slated for scrap. Their crews were the discarded, deserters, exiles, debtors, the ones too reckless or too damned for the pristine fleets. They called themselves the Tattered. And when Elias limped onto the command deck of their flagship, the crew greeted him with laughter, curses, and suspicion. He quieted them with a single sentence. If you're here, it's because you were thrown away. Same as me. Let's make the galaxy regret that. What followed were raids that became legend. The Tattered struck from shadows, ambushing Morvani splinters, tearing out their throats before vanishing. Elias rewired ship systems with scavenged parts, patched hulls with duct tape and desperation, and filled the void with blaring transmissions of ancient human rock and mockery. They're not gods, he would tell his crew. They bleed like anything else. So make them bleed loud. Caliph rode with him on several raids, her precise mind forced into the chaos of his improvisation. At first she resisted, horrified at his disregard for doctrine, but she began to see a terrible genius in his methods. He made impossible risks into survivable gambits. He turned despair into laughter. He fought not because he believed he could win, but because refusing to fight was worse. Yet the cost was steep. Ships shattered. Men and women burned. Caliph recorded everything, her voice brittle. He commands through humor and defiance, but each victory is bought with blood. His body weakens daily, yet he drives himself beyond reason. I fear he seeks death more than triumph. And then came the trap. A beacon drew them to a derelict colony on the edge of the void, its towers silent, its fields ash. The Tattered entered the ruins searching for survivors. Instead, they found the swarm waiting. Ships erupted from the dark, encircling them. The Morvani struck with coordinated fury, and for the first time, Elias faltered. The battle turned to slaughter. The Tattered screamed as ships burst apart one by one. Caliph clung to the railing of the command deck as their flagship shuddered under blows. Elias stood at the helm, eyes blazing, his voice ragged. We don't retreat, he barked. We break through. But we're outnumbered 20-1, cried his first mate. Good, Elias snarled. That means we can hit 20 for the price of one. He drove the ship forward, ramming through a Morvani vessel, fire blossoming across the void. He laughed like a madman as alarm screamed. Caliph saw the blood seeping through his bandages, the tremor in his hands, the inevitability of his collapse. And still he fought. At the height of the chaos, the swarm's war leader revealed itself. A massive creature fused into the hull of a living dreadnought, its face a crown of gnashing spines. It fixed its countless eyes on Elias's vessel and roared across the comms in a language of static and hunger. Elias grinned, pale and burning. Finally, he whispered, then louder, you wanted me? Come and choke on it. He steered directly into the beast's jaws. At the last instant, he triggered a chain of detonations wired from scavenged fuel cells. The explosion ripped the dreadnought open, sending shockwaves through the swarm. Caliph was thrown to the deck, blinded by light. When vision returned, the battlefield was chaos. The swarm reeled, their formation broken. The Tattered, bloodied but breathing, seized the moment and fled. Against all reason, they survived. On the command deck, Elias collapsed, coughing blood, his body shaking. Caliph rushed to him, pressing a hand against his wounds. Why do you keep doing this? She demanded. His eyes opened, pale and haunted, but a faint smile tugged at his lips. Because someone has to. She held his gaze, and for the first time, she did not see madness. She saw grief weaponized into defiance. She saw a man who had lost everything yet still chose to rise again and again, until the stars themselves grew weary of striking him down. In the aftermath, songs spread across the empire. Children whispered that the swarm feared one name. Merchants painted duct tape sigils on their doors. Soldiers carried gray strips as charms. The Baba Yaga had become more than myth. He was warning and promise. Caliph, in her reports, could no longer write as inquisitor alone. She wrote as witness. We believed humanity to be reckless parasites. Now I begin to think their recklessness is their greatest weapon. They do not survive because they are strongest. They survive because they refuse extinction, no matter how absurd the cost. And so the story of the tattered grew, a story of ruin made into resistance, of laughter sharpened into blade. Elias Veyer, stitched together by duct tape and sheer spite, had shown the galaxy that even despair can be broken if you are stubborn enough to laugh while bleeding. And you, reader, must remember this. Courage is rarely clean, rarely noble. Often it is nothing more than staggering forward, bloodied and foolish because standing still is worse. So when the void opens its jaws, ask yourself not if you are brave, but if you are stubborn enough to refuse being swallowed. The first sound was not a scream, but a laugh, high-cracked and human. It echoed across the palace war court as the swarm's envoy was dragged in chains of plasma light. The creature, half spine, half shadow, laughed as though mocking the chamber itself. We tasted your human. It rasped in a dozen voices layered atop one another. We tore his bones and found only defiance. If one such can exist, how many more? The council recoiled. Calitha's obsidian eyes darted to Elias Veyer, who sat slumped in a chair at the chamber's edge, bandages wrapped across half his body. His laughter was quieter but real, as if sharing a joke only he understood. See, he whispered hoarsely. Told you. They don't fear your fleets. They fear me, which means they fear all of us. He should have been dead 10 times over. Each wound looked final, his skin a map of ruin. Yet his presence gnawed at the swarm like rust on steel. For months, the tattered had turned from exiles to legends, binding the Empire's crumbling spirit. Now the war had reached its crescendo. The swarm amassed beyond the veil of stars, a tide preparing to drown the capital itself. Elias leaned forward, his cane rattling against the marble. They'll strike here, at the heart. You've got days, maybe less. The Emperor's crystalline voice trembled, whether from fear or fury none could tell. Then give us your solution, Baba Yaga. For all your defiance, what weapon do you wield that we cannot? Elias smiled, blood cracking at the corner of his lips. The one you never could stomach, desperation. Preparations consumed the capital. The tattered were summoned, battered hulls limping into orbit like ghosts summoned for judgment. Soldiers lined the streets, their armor painted with gray stripes in crude imitation of duct tape. Children whispered his name as spell and shield. And in quiet corridors, Caliph followed Elias, watching him cough blood between jokes, watching the weight he carried in silence. She confronted him one night on a deserted balcony. You are killing yourself, she said. Each battle carves more from you. You cannot last another. He regarded her, eyes pale as frost. You're right. Then he smiled faintly. That's why this one has to count. Caliph felt words rise. Pleas, protests, something she had no name for, but none left her throat. Instead, she reached out, brushing her hand against his scarred knuckles. He did not pull away. The swarm arrived at dawn. Not ships, but a storm of living blades, eclipsing the horizon. They descended in silence, not with horns or declarations, but with hunger vast enough to unmake worlds. The Empire's fleets formed gleaming lines, and the battle began. It was slaughter. Silver formations broke under the living tide. The sky itself seemed to scream as ships burst into fire. And then the tattered charged. Their vessels were patched monstrosities, engines roaring, music blaring across calms. They dove into the heart of the swarm, tearing open gaps, buying seconds at impossible cost. Elias commanded from the lead, his voice ragged but steady, hurling orders like challenges. Left flank, bleed them dry. Caliph, feed power to the shields. And someone find me a burrito. If I'm dying today, I'm dying full. Through smoke and fire, Caliph watched him stand straighter than his body should allow, fury burning brighter than pain. She realized, with a hollow ache, that he was not merely fighting the swarm. He was fighting his own ending, refusing to yield until the last. The climax came when the swarm's core descended, a monstrous sphere of writhing spines, pulsing with the light of consumed stars. Its voice thundered across the channels, dozens layered into one. Human, end yourself, and we will leave the rest. Elias laughed, wild and raw. Sorry, self-destruction's your game, not mine. Humanity prefers improv. Then, to his crew, brace yourselves. We're going in. He drove the flagship directly into the sphere. Alarms wailed, the hull buckled, fire tore across the deck. Caliph screamed his name, but he only looked back once, eyes meeting hers with something quiet, apology, gratitude, maybe even love, but without words. He triggered the last of the scavenged fuel cells, a chain of explosions that ripped open the swarm's heart. The void blazed white. The enemy shrieked in fury, fracturing, retreating into the abyss like shadows scorched from stone. When silence fell, only wreckage remained. The tattered, what few ships survived, limped back in disbelief. The swarm was broken, not gone, but shattered, their tide turned. On the ruined deck, amidst smoke and ruin, Caliph found Elias collapsed beside the shattered helm. He was alive, barely. His breaths were shallow, his body failing. She knelt, cradling his head, her voice shaking. You've done enough. Rest now. His eyes flickered open. Rest? He chuckled weakly. Not yet. Someone's got to teach your people about cats. His lips quirked, then his gaze softened. Caliph, remember, tell them it wasn't duct tape. It was belief. And with that, his eyes closed. He did not die that day, though many believed he should have. He lingered, suspended between life and death, carried into legend by whispers and songs. The empire rebuilt, scarred but unbroken. The swarm withdrew, fearful not of fleets or emperors, but of one human who refused extinction. Caliph wrote the final report with trembling hands. We thought humanity chaos made flesh, incapable of order, bound for self-destruction. We were wrong. Their chaos is their weapon, their laughter their shield, their stubbornness their salvation. The Baba Yaga is not myth. He is warning. He is hope. Years later, children still wrapped gray ribbons around their arms, calling themselves tattered. Markets sold burritos in his honor. Cats prowled palace corridors, baffling officials yet adored by soldiers. And duct tape became holy, a relic of defiance. But Caliph remembered him not as legend, not as myth, but as a man who smiled while bleeding, who reached for her hand when the void closed in. And so I tell you, reader, do not mistake survival for strength. Strength bends. Strength breaks. Survival belongs to those who laugh when they should weep, who stagger forward when collapse is easier, who hold duct tape to the hull and say, not today. Remember this, when your own night arrives, the stars do not honor perfection. They honor those too stubborn to die quietly.